Like Olivia, I have learned much Torah from Taylor Swift. It's one lyric in particular this week that I've been thinking about. She sings the words, "Darling, I'm a nightmare dressed like a daydream." And in some weird and strange way this week, that sentence encapsulates something of the beauty and challenge of the diversity of our Jewish world, where it's possible for something to be both someone's wildest and most wonderful dream and another's worst nightmare. So I read an article on a website that's now been rebranded as Vin News or Vin News. It used to be called Was ist Neues. It's the news website of the frum, in inverted commas, Torah, Judaism, ultra-Orthodox world. If I'm honest, it's not really my media provider of choice. But I read an article and it begins thus. Imagine, Chalila, the Kossel being run by a Rabbi Jill, a Reform rabbi. And it goes on to detail a nightmare vision in the eyes of its author. A progressive female rabbi in charge of the Kotel, parity of funding for different religious streams of Judaism, LGBTQ rights, an end to the monopoly of the Orthodox rabbinate in issues of religion and personal life in the State of Israel, such as marriage, adoption, and divorce. I don't think I need to go on. His nightmare, my daydream. The article was written to engage what is called the Torah community, ahead of the upcoming World Zionist Congress elections, registration for which begins in the UK this upcoming Tuesday. I find the idea that there is a part of the Jewish community that thinks it has a monopoly on the notion of Torah Judaism deeply flawed. Is this not a Torah community? Is not what we've done this morning exactly Torah Judaism? It's deliberately ideologically chosen language, claiming a name to lay claim to something that actually belongs to all of us. But just because someone calls something something doesn't mean it's true. Torah Judaism does not only mean fundamentalist Judaism. Torah Judaism, as it called itself, makes as many choices about what its Torah is as we do. All Jewish streams, as we know them today, are a product of the Enlightenment, of the encounter between Judaism and the modern world. And fundamentalist orthodoxy is as much a chidush, an innovation, as Reform Judaism is. We all make choices about the Torah that our Judaism is built on. And while there are some similarities, I don't think anyone anywhere in the Jewish world, to paraphrase the West Wing, is burning their mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from two different threads, or stoning their stubborn and rebellious child to death. Different parts of the Jewish world do make important and justifiable choices about the Torah that anchors their Jewish reality. You could argue that it's not necessary for our two different worldviews to ever cross paths. We could just coexist, two groups of people who see themselves as having figured out the best way to live a Jewish life in our era, which I think would be great, and would probably be true, except 77 years ago, the Jewish people embarked on a huge shared task of building a Jewish state. And in this work, our worldviews come into direct conflict. Because once you have a Jewish state, you have a question. What Judaism is the Judaism of the Jewish state? And once you have a Jewish state, its Judaism has ramifications for the rights and freedoms of all of those who live in it, its political character, and it sets powerful norms for Judaism around the world as well. Things like, who can marry who? Who can be called a rabbi? Who can pray and where? What can people do on Shabbat? Can women sing in public? Can women hold leadership roles? What are the borders of the State of Israel? Who can be buried where? What rights do LGBTQ people have? And so it goes on. Rabbi Stanley Davids, a teacher who I loved, who died last week, but not before he'd made sure he'd voted in the Congress elections, taught me a powerful piece of vocabulary: political theology. This is a way of thinking about the natural consequences of our religious beliefs and how they interact with the world. Sometimes our religious values are just for us and the way that we live our individual lives. But sometimes they have essential and necessary political consequences, where in order to preserve and protect a value, you have to take political action. And he argued that Reform Judaism has a natural and a necessary political theology, and it's called Reform Zionism. To understand what this means, I wanted to share some words by Stanley's correspondent, Rabbi Chaim Rechnitzer, who says this. He says, "The language of political theology is powerful because it can define reality. It can direct the course of policy making. Most importantly, its power derives from its ability to have a political impact. For example, if part of the narrative of Zionism uses the term redemption of the land, and the term is woven into a larger religious context, the political act of settlement becomes a religious one, and the preaching of rabbis about redemption of the land has direct political consequences. Theology can be another player, sometimes a decisive player, in the political economic decision-making process. And this, for me, is why the question of Torah Judaism, of theology, and of our role in this conversation is so important. To help us understand this a bit more, I wanted to focus on the Torah Judaism of FRS. And I'm going to use the material behind me, our ark, which, as you can see, is, or decorated feels not quite the right word, but I don't have the other word, so decorated is the word I'm going with, has a number of different texts, all drawn from the text of Tanakh, that we decided as a community through a process of learning and studying and discussing as a clergy team and with our lay leaders, we felt like we're the kind of Jewish anchors, or the textual anchors of our Jewish lives. For example, did find these earlier. Here we go. Here, Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam b'tzameinu. The idea that God said we are going to create people in the image of God. Or this one here, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. If these Torah principles are central to your Judaism and your theology, your understanding of what God and Torah require of you, then they have certain significant political ramifications. It's these religious ideas that lead the Reform movement in Israel to lead civil discourse and to work actively in Israel's legal system for the rights of LGBTQ couples, for equal gender rights, for parity of funding for bomb shelters in Jewish and Arab towns, in support of those who face systemic racism. It's the notion up here, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice that you shall pursue, that grounds our movement's commitment to democracy and is the reason that the Reform movement's rabbis and lay leaders have been front and center in the democracy protests in Israel and during this war, and using the structures of Israel's democracy, such as the Supreme Court, to fight for political freedoms and advances. It's this one, Lo'ovda u'l'shamra, to work the land and protect it, that grounds us in this idea that we are responsible for the places that we live and their character and nature. And it's this stuff, all of these issues that I've mentioned, all of these values we're talking about, that is the battleground in some upcoming elections, as our Torah Judaism, the political theology of progressive Judaism, is under attack from those who believe that there is another, different Torah Judaism that is incompatible with these tenets of our tradition. They are upset, for instance, that it is possible to call LGBTQ helplines from kosher phones. They are concerned about the presence of an egalitarian prayer space at the Kotel. They want to reintroduce segregated bus lines in Israel after the Reform movement successfully won cases on behalf of Orthodox women and campaigned to desegregate them. They want to redefine the boundaries of the State of Israel as the maximalist boundaries of the biblical land, including vast territory that extends all the way to modern-day Iraq and Saudi Arabia. I want to make it clear, I have no issue with those who want to live a particular form of Jewish life doing it within certain bounds. I'm a pluralist, as is the Reform movement. I would be deeply hypocritical to acknowledge that we are all making choices and have the right to do so, and then assert my choices over someone else. The challenge is not about personal, independent freedoms. It's about when our religious freedoms begin to assert political direction. And this is where there is legitimate room for debate and disagreement. What the Reform movement and the Liberal movement are fighting for is the space for Jewish difference, where there are maximalist religious freedoms and equalities baked into the structures of the Jewish state that enable as many Jews as possible to find their place, and that mean that they ripple out from Israel into the Jewish world and continue to reflect and uphold the diversity of all of Judaism, as well as reflecting and engaging with the reality that our lives impact other people's lives, that the Jewish state engages not just with the lives of Jews, but also non-Jewish minorities within the Jewish state and those who live on its borders. When people say to me that they find it stressful or frustrating that we as diaspora Jews have no influence on or say in what happens in Israel, I always remind them that this is not true. Baked into the structure of the modern state of Israel are some powerful and important organizations that mean we are able to be having the conversation we're having today about the importance of our movement and its theology. When Theodor Herzl founded the Zionist movement, he brought together Jews from all stripes and ways of thought into a congress of a Zionist organization that he formed. Over time, that congress and that organization developed operational arms that you might have heard of, like Keren Kayemet Israel, the Jewish National Fund, that dealt with land purchase and acquisition and management, and the Jewish Agency for Israel, that dealt with education, aliyah, civilian infrastructure, and more. These organizations still exist today, and because of their connection to the Zionist movement, they are still shaped by an amazing, if not absolutely headache-inducing, democratic process. Herzl's original Zionist Congress has grown into a 530-ish person parliament, in which Jewish denominations, Israeli political parties, and international Jewish organizations are all represented democratically. The political parties get their seat allocation from the Israeli elections, and the rest of us get our seat allocation from local elections. The Parliament of the Congress then votes on and agrees strategies for the national organizations of Israel and controls a huge, and when I say huge, I mean billions of dollars budget that impacts funding for every single religious group in Israel and around the world, for settlement and education funding, and much, much more. It's about half of the budget of the Reform movement in Israel, and probably a not dissimilar amount of the worldwide Reform movement's budget that is allocated as a result of these organizations. Because of the size of the American Reform movement, Reform Judaism, and the next denomination in size-wise down is Conservative Judaism, non-Orthodox Jews are a significant majority in North America, and because of that, we've had a huge influence in these spaces, which means that we've been able to ensure funding for the Reform movement. We've been able to push for, alongside many other groups within the movement, representation in diverse religious ways in the Israeli army and education system, funding for pluralist education, and we've been able to restrict the use of diaspora and national Jewish funds in building and growth over the Green Line in areas that Israel controls but is not likely to hold on to under any future peace agreement. Since the Reform movement held the chair, for instance, of Himnuta, which is one of the property company subsidiaries of JNF Kakal, we were able to reverse a decision to evict Bedouin families from their home and destroy their homes, and instead work with the community on a process of rebuilding and settlement and community development, including women's and children's empowerment programs and education programs. And it's this work that has upset and awoken the self-proclaimed Torah world, who are non-Zionist in nature, but they believe that the affront that they see us representing to Jewish life is a threat enough to issue a religious decree to make it permissible to sign a commitment to the state of Israel that they don't religiously believe in, because they believe we have to wait for the Messiah in diaspora. So we have, on one hand, the kind of fundamentalist Torah world that's been awoken by the progressive movement's success in this work. And on the other hand, we have the radical right in the diaspora, who would vote for fundamentalist radicals like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, and advocate for their dangerous, violent, and racist policies. And this, all of this, is why your vote matters. Because we have an unholy alliance of Jewish fundamentalists in the current Israeli Knesset and ultra-Orthodox fundamentalists in the diaspora. And they are seeking to use this upcoming election to induce a seismic sea change in the structure of diaspora Jewish life and in Israel. And this is our fight to lose. They are relying on our liberalism, our passivity, and our hesitation from the decidedly outdated nature of these organisations and the bit of a faff that it requires to get involved to stop us turning out the vote. The first word in this week's Sedra, Vayikra, ends in a small aleph. It's said that Moses wanted to write not Vayikra, but Vayikra, suggesting that rather than God spoke to Moses, that God happened upon Moses, as if God had only happened upon him accidentally. God told Moses off and told him to write an aleph and assert his place in the story. And so Moses compromised and he wrote a small aleph. And I guess this Shabbat, I'm asking you not to do what Moses did. I'm asking you to take your rightful sized space in the story of the Jewish people. This is not a moment to be humble. It's a moment to make sure each and every one of us, our voices and our children's Jewish future is represented and counted. So here's what you need to know. The actual vote in the UK is in June. Because of the huge amount of money involved and the ideological pressures here, the chance of fraud is deemed to be high, which means everyone who wants to have a vote has to register first. And it means this election will essentially be won or lost during the registration period. Registration opens on Tuesday and it lasts a month. Anyone Jewish over 18 who hasn't voted in the recent Israeli Knesset elections or any other Congress election overseas can vote. To vote, you have to pay what is known as the Zionist shekel, a nominal amount of £1 that has some really lovely biblical roots and basically goes to fund the voting infrastructure. The Reform, Masorti and Liberal movements are running a joint slate together called Our Israel, which focuses on religious pluralism, democracy and freedom. There are lots of other parties running, and you can vote for whoever you like. All I can do is tell you why this matters to our shul, to our Torah values and to our colleagues and work in Israel, but it has to be up to each eligible voter to make their choice. So here's what I'm asking you this Shabbat. Tell your friends. Tell everyone. Know that this voice is ours to use to shape the future of the Jewish people in Israel and in the diaspora for a generation to come. And make sure that it is the voice of a Torah Judaism that you are proud to be part of that speaks loudest into the future as we take ownership of our Jewish path together. Shabbat Shalom. We're on page 310.